And so, yeah, to have a woman whose only experience with education is homeschooling her kids, now in charge. I mean, homeschooling is literally non-public, and she's now running for the office superintendent of public instruction. Like, come on.
All right, our guest this week is Lindsey Prather of North Carolina. How's it going?
Going well. How are you?
I'm doing really good. So why don't you go ahead and tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I am Lindsey Prather. I'm a current state representative in North Carolina, and I am running for re-election this year. I'm currently in my first term in office. Just wrapped up my first year and running for re-election this year. My day job, since the legislature doesn't pay a whole lot, is working back at my alma mater at a public university here in the area, in the admissions office. So get to work with incoming students there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you're still involved in teaching. You're still doing that as a job as well.
Yeah, it's still involved in education. Yeah. Not a teacher anymore, but definitely
Okay.
still involved in education. Yeah. And then the district that I represent is in Western North Carolina. So we are in the mountains. It includes the county that Asheville is in.
Okay. A lot of bears out there, black
Yeah,
bears. You guys got
there
black
are
bears,
a
right?
ton of bears out here,
Uh-huh.
actually. We get bears on campus a lot. We have to mention it during our campus tours.
I'm in Northern California, so I know a little bit about that too. We
I'm
have
sure.
bears, mountain lions,
Yep, we got
foxes,
them.
yeah, coyotes. I was just actually watching something today where a guy was talking about things that you might want to know before moving to North Carolina. It was lots of spiders, lots of bears, lots of snakes.
It really, when you put it that way, yeah. I mean, there's like pretty birds and stuff too, but there's
Don't you guys have alligators? Do you guys have
um
maybe not your side of the state?
we do. Yes, we do. Another fun thing about North Carolina, we are one of only two places in the world where the Venus flytrap is native.
Oh, Little Shop of Horrors.
Yep, yep. Love
Awesome.
this state.
Well, as far as your educational background goes, you were a teacher for a while, correct?
Yeah.
And I think as a parent, I have two young children. I'm in California. A lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about education in California, what our kids are being taught, what they're not being taught. I tend to have lots of conversations with people on the right that claim that my children are being indoctrinated and taught things about transgenderism and being groomed and all these things. And almost every time I'm always like, no, that's true. I'm like, I go to my kids. I literally go to my children and say, hey, are these things you guys are learning? Because I don't, I'm
Ask
involved
them.
in my kids' education, but I don't always know. And my kids are always like, no, why? Why are you even asking me this right now? I'm like, well, I'm concerned. So there's a lot of misconceptions, and some of the things that I think that people, when you first have your children involved in public education, at least, that seems to be one of the biggest misconceptions is Common Core. And I've tried to explain to people before that when we talk about children going to school, it's not so much about like learning facts as it is learning, ways to solve problems and find solutions. I always say when people say algebra, why are you learning algebra? I'll never use algebra. And I say, well, it's not about learning algebra. It's about learning how to find the solution to a problem and then taking that out in the real world and applying that. It's more about learning memory, learning ways to take notes, learning how to find solutions. What do you think of Common Core? Do you think there's anything about it that we should change or anything that we could better explain to parents to help them kind of get on board with Common Core?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think you set it up well in what I was going to start with my answer with, which is that there are a lot of misconceptions
Yeah.
and a lot of misunderstandings about Common Core, and a huge part of that is lack of communication, and I mean, that's the onus is on the rollout and the people who implement it, and to explain what it is and why it's important. I I support the premise of Common Core.
Mhm.
I support parts of Common Core, absolutely. I do think that we should have a kind of baseline of knowledge and skills that we expect students to come out of school with. The fact that it really only applies to English and math, I believe, sends a message that, and with that message comes funding oftentimes, on that those subjects are overly important. So I think that along with Common Core, whether there's a causation or correlation, along with Common Core, we have seen sort of a devaluing of the humanities, of history, of social
Oh.
studies. We'll talk about Mark Robinson later, who specifically
Mhm.
has said that he doesn't think we should teach history or science in elementary school at all.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So I do agree with the premise. Um, but I struggle a little bit with, like I said, the way that we explain it. But it also is very prescriptive and very narrow in some ways, in terms
Mm.
of what types of math it's requiring, and how those are being taught. Now the curriculum is completely decided by local districts, and that's awesome. I think that is a really big misconception. The curriculum is not dictated by the federal government. I think it's important that parents know that for sure. But I do think the way that it's been implemented has sort of restricted what schools are able to do and how they're able to teach. States have different needs. States have different workforce development needs. They have different, environmental and geological factors that might require different types of sciences. There are, each state has a rich history and culture that's unique. And so I think there are all different ways that we should allow states to be flexible in education. I think that implementation of policies is much better at the state and local level when it comes to
Mhm.
education. Um, but I also support the idea of having a baseline expectation of what our students are learning. It's not often these days that students kind of stay in their hometown, or even in their state. I think we should do everything we can to encourage people to, if they want to, as an option. But yeah, to an extent, we need to prepare all students for for whatever their future might hold. But yeah, I think implementation and who's a part of those conversations are things that we could do a lot better at.
Yeah, I like the whole point of view on it being local, and I like the point of view that you're making about states as well, because we are much more diverse, I think, than people really think. Right? When we think of the United States of America, we kind of think East Coast, West Coast, and Midwest. Right? We don't, or we think North South. We don't think state by state. And I think that there is, even when you talk about the southern states, there's a big difference between, when you're talking about either Texas or Tennessee, or, like, I'm from California. I've lived in California my whole life. And I grew up in central or Southern California, down by Los Angeles and in Bakersfield. And that's a very country area. And I think when people think of California, they think of California as being, very like hippie, very, free spirit, beaches, all these things. And there's so much diversity just in California, right?
Yes,
And
yeah.
then when you look at the United States as a whole, you start to find like each one of these states has, this different, really important contribution to who we are as the United States of America. And if people aren't learning about their states and learning about what makes them unique and what makes their contribution to the United States important, then you start to kind of, you lose a little bit of your personality, And when I was speaking to John Pedora actually about Colorado, he was very like strongly proud of Colorado, right? Like, this is where I'm from. And when I talked to Katrina Christian from North Dakota, I may have mocked something to do with North Dakota, and she's like, "Hey, I love North Dakota."
Dude, yes, absolutely. People get attached to their state if they know about their state, right?
They have to
And I
know.
mean, follow
Mhm.
this with like, I mean, there are different, large minority or ethnic groups in
Mhm.
different states, right? So we have a huge Montagnard Vietnamese
Oh
population
yeah.
in North Carolina.
Mhm.
Like I would have loved to, but I know more about like Latino immigration history in California, or
Mhm.
the Great Migration to northern cities, than I do about Montagnard history. I know
Mhm.
more if I'm learning about racial violence in my history class, right? I know more about riots in Chicago than I do about the coup that happened in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898. I didn't learn about
Mhm.
that until I was an adult.
Yeah.
Um, so I do. I think that there are ways to talk about it, right? If we're talking about the civil, just because we're in North Carolina, that doesn't mean that anytime we talk about the Civil War, we have to talk about it from the perspective of the South.
Mhm.
There was a very strong contingent pocket here in the Appalachian Mountains of Union sympathizers. The county just northwest of me, Madison County, is known as Bloody Madison because there was a huge group of Union sympathizers there that were murdered.
Oh
But
wow.
again, I didn't learn about it until until I was an adult. So yeah, I think that there are ways that you can learn more about true history and local history while at the same time celebrating who we are today and the common things that we are today.
Yeah, and that's what makes us who we are. Kind of a just a fun fact. My grandfather worked with the Montagnards in Vietnam. He was one of the people that parachuted in and actually worked behind enemy lines with them. Yeah.
That's
So
amazing. My mom
yeah.
used to volunteer for a refugee resettlement organization down in the Raleigh area, and she
Oh
worked
wow.
specifically with. We have a lot of Martin Yard friends. Yeah, she worked with them for years, helping resettle.
Crazy. Yeah,
Yeah.
and what you're saying about learning about it from the perspective of it doesn't always have to be the bad perspective of it. When we talk about things like what's going on with Florida, with kind of like the idea of changing the history of slavery to be more of a good thing, if you look at it the correct way, actually they learned a lot of skills and stuff. That's not really, it's not necessary, because you can.
No.
I say this. I've read quite a bit about George Washington. Right,
Mhm.
George Washington is undeniably a huge part of our history. I think George Washington was a terrible general, and if someone can fight me on that if they want, but I am 100% in full belief that if Britain had taken us even a little bit more seriously, we wouldn't be a country right now. But uh, George Washington obviously own slaves, and that's a hard thing for us to come to deal with, because we have this figure that we hold up as being a huge part of who we are, and at the same time we have these really difficult things to deal with, and that is that the man owned people. And it's really hard to sit here and say, oh, any person that ever owned a human being was a good person. So we have to both agree that he was very important to our history. He's probably the epitome of a politician. He is probably one of the best politicians that has ever lived. Being the first to do it in America was huge. But also on the other end of that, he did things that we can't be proud of, that are very embarrassing. And regardless of whether or not he wanted to free the slaves, whether or not he did some things with his slaves that maybe were better than other people, he still owned human beings,
Yeah.
and that's a bad thing. And I think that we need to get to a point in our educational system where we take our children a little more seriously. Like, I have real conversations with my
Yes.
kid, right? I
Yes.
treat them like, not so much like adults, but like equals. Like, I
Yeah.
don't talk to my children, I don't condescend to them. I Whenever there's something that's important due to my background, I have a lot of information pertaining to violence, to drugs, to crime, and I don't hide that from my children. I talk to them about it. I tell them stories. Sometimes they're a little taken aback because they don't know the me that grew up there. They know the me that they have now. But I get to share with them an experience that they haven't ever had, and hopefully never will have in their lives. And at the same time, they don't grow up not knowing about it and are confronted by it and don't know how to react to it, right?
Right.
So we have this history that involves slavery, that involves, the South wanting to secede, and we can both admit that that happened and also still be proud of our heritage. And that means admitting when we were wrong.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
but
And
it also means moving on and saying, but look at who I am now. And
exactly.
that's for me is a big thing, because if you knew me when I was 19 and you asked me, half the things I believe nowadays, I wouldn't agree with probably 70% of it. My wife all the time goes, you didn't think that 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I go, yeah, I know, but I've learned and I've educated myself, and I'm more inclusive, more diverse. So I think that's huge to hear you say that, like, on a basic level, we need to be teaching the history of our states, there are things about Common Core that are good, but maybe that, the things that surround it need to still be accepted as being important. And it's great to hear from an educator that this is true, because I think a lot of people take teachers for granted and think, you're just showing up to do a job. I've said this about healthcare as well. Um, we want people in education, we want people in healthcare, and we want people in government that care about being there.
Yes.
One of the biggest misconceptions I think we have right now, specifically probably right now, is that politicians don't care, that there is no care for the average person. They're all people trying to take money and put themselves in good places, enrich their lives. And as you just said, it's not like you're making enough money to even quit your day job. So you obviously have some care for that. And speaking of that, one of the things that I've really thought was great that Joe Biden's been doing during his presidency, something that he tried to do, and obviously the Supreme Court overturned at the beginning, was the forgiveness of college debt. I myself believe that free education should be a part of America. I think, as the biggest, best economy in the world, and we are, that we should be finding ways to pass that along to the next generation. And one of the ways that we can do that is through free college education. How do you feel about free college education, and do you support his efforts in the way that he's going about canceling debt nowadays?
Yeah. So I will answer those in reverse order. So
Mhm.
I absolutely support Joe Biden's efforts to cancel student debt, and I support the approach that they're taking. Essentially, that we have to triage people, right? I
Mhm.
mean, it's undeniable that certain groups of students need help and are in a worse situation than other groups of students. So I support. It's we can't wait
Mhm.
until everybody is approved, right? We got to chip away what we can. So for the immediate, I absolutely support students who have been paying off a loan for over 15 years.
Yeah.
That's insane. Students who were taken advantage of by these predatory for-profit schools that make promises that they couldn't keep, right? Those
Mhm.
students need to be prioritized. Students who, through no fault of their own, were not able to complete their degree, right? Maybe the school closed and they're still having to pay off those student loans. So I think I like that approach that they're taking, and I fully support that. I think at the same time, we cannot address this issue unless we are also looking at the long term, right? So we've got the short term covered with what they're working on, and hopefully the Supreme. I don't have a whole lot of hope, but we'll see if they have more flexibility with what the executive branch can do there. But I also feel very strongly that there are things we can do to help address the cost of education for students in the next couple of years, right? Uh, there's kind of three levels: short term, midterm, and then long term. We don't have time to talk about cost of inflating cost of education, but for what students are paying right now and over the next couple of years, there's a lot of things that we can do. We are leaving millions of dollars on the table. We, meaning states, are leaving millions of dollars on the table every year when students don't complete the FAFSA. So our and I would say to anybody out there who is engaged and cares about things and wants to talk to your legislator about things like this, you can look up in a lot of states the FAFSA completion rates for certain counties or certain school districts.
Is that FAFSA?
Sorry,
FAS?
FAFSA. Yes, the free application for federal student aid.
Oh, okay. Okay.
FAFSA. Yeah,
Mhm.
sorry.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, so the FAFSA is it's a free application that families complete in order to qualify for the Pell Grant
Mm.
or other scholarships and grants. And then a lot of states use that information to determine what scholarships and grant students are available are eligible for as well. So when students don't complete that means they're not being told what scholarships and grants are available to them. So these students, and we've seen data, students who don't complete the FAFSA are way less likely to even go to college. Um,
What do you think is the main reason for people to not complete it? Is it because the paperwork is maybe a little too cumbersome? Do you think people don't think that they're gonna like actually like qualify for these grants?
Yes, and yes,
Hmm.
and all of the above. We it's way more confusing than it should be. We're in the middle of a FAFSA crisis right now. Actually, anybody who's got families who have kids in college or kids who are applying to college right now, they absolutely are very aware of this. But yeah, so it's an extremely confusing form. It A lot of students, there are questions on there that make students maybe who don't have citizenship or whose parents don't have citizenship, they are discouraged from completing this form, or they're worried that if they complete this form that INS will find them. So that's a
Yeah.
huge issue.
Hmm.
And in North Carolina, DACA students do not qualify for in-state tuition. So they have to pay, which is makes a huge difference. So they would have to pay 3 times as much, right? So that's an easy fix that the legislature could do to help increase the number of students that are in school. But yeah, so the other thing is that North Carolina is almost dead last. I think we're 49th in what
Hmm.
percentage of our GDP we spend on students. And so when you have school counselors are supposed to be one of the people that's helping families through this form, complete this form, apply to college, make sure that they're applying to scholarships. When you have a school counselor who has a caseload of 500 students, they're
Hmm.
they're not able to do that, right? So it's all connected. When we're not funding these support positions and these staff and these teachers in schools, they're not able to spend the time with families to talk to them about their college options.
Hmm.
When we're not spending time and resources on career development, right? What are students interested in doing? We're not even talking about internships until they're already in college. Well, by then, it's too late. So I don't know. I can feel myself getting on the
Yeah.
soapbox, but there are a lot of things that we could do both in the short term and in the long term. And honestly, that's one of my biggest issues with with government in general. Like, we have the solution to probably 90% of the problems that we face. It's
Hmm.
it's just an issue of political will and being willing to fund and resource those solutions.
Yeah, and I think when you have the two different parties, you have obviously on the left, you have people that are saying we want to create social safety nets, we want to attempt to make education more accessible, and I think what a lot of people maybe on the right don't understand is the financial impact of those immigrants, of those people who are trying to get educated and find better jobs, and the higher jobs are going to be very important here soon, specifically with like the CHIPS Act that Biden or Schumer is one I believe who pushed it through. But when you have jobs like that going through, well, you're going to need educated people to work those jobs. And so when you're looking at DACA, and I'm pretty sure the reason with the DACA, it's the Supreme Court, right? It's still being held up by the Supreme Court.
North Carolina legislature could make that decision as a state legislature
Mm.
to
Okay.
qualify DACA students for in-state tuition rates.
Okay, because I know there's a lot of stuff with the DACA right now that's still up in the air because of I forgot what the decision was.
Yeah.
But as far as like free education goes, do you support, like, for me, my personal non-government complete like pipe dream idea is that I think that the first 4 years of college should be free. I think it should be subsidized by the government and obviously by taxpayers' money. I'm happy to pay more taxes to make that happen. Being
Mhm.
from California, people constantly complain about taxes here, but I like the programs that we fund. I like the social safety nets. I grew up on food stamps, welfare. I haven't had unemployment in my life, but my wife did during COVID, as she became a teacher for a year.
Oh,
I think 4 years of free education is the baseline. I think that people should be allowed. I think that they should be allowed to take it at any time in their life, whether they're 18 or they're 42. And I also think that there should be a chance also to put those 4 years into trade school instead of actual college education to keep the trades going as well. How do you feel? Do you feel like 4 years of free college, or you got something different than that?
yeah. So I see your four,
Mm-hmm.
and I think 2 years of free college, and I think 2 years
Okay.
of free community college. And so that's what I support for North Carolina, and I'll
Mm-hmm.
tell you why. So we have a fantastic community college system in North Carolina. We have 58 community colleges. We have a fantastic public university system, UNC system. We've got 17 campuses for the UNC system. And we have done a really good job. We're getting better at it, but we've also so far done a really good job of making it fairly easy for a student to do those general education credits the first 2 years at a community college and then transfer to a UNC system school and do roughly 2 more years to get that bachelor's degree. So that 2 years of community college can either be 2 years that you're working toward then a bachelor's degree after you transfer, or most of the kind of licensure certificate programs that we have at community colleges are roughly 2 years as well. So I think that sort of equalizes it. It gives students the opportunity to access those 2 free years. The reason I would not say four, honestly, is because there are a lot of well to do families out there that can afford a college education, and them paying full price helps to subsidize the education for other students that can't pay. And so I would argue more for the money that we're spending, making sure it's going to who it should be going to, um, as opposed to now. Of course, that does require paperwork. It requires some bureaucracy. It does,
Mm-hmm.
make us complete some forms. It would be a lot easier and cleaner to say everybody 4 years, but that's why I think I would say two.
Well, I like
Um,
that too because it's a bit of a middle ground. I'm kind of a middle ground person. I do think we have to give and take, right? So,
Yeah,
so
well, and also I will say, so in North Carolina, there's initiative lately to kind of take a second look at jobs. Right now, we're just focusing on government jobs, but take a second look at state government agency jobs across the state and what the degree requirements are for those jobs,
yeah.
and to decide, to revisit whether these jobs really do require bachelor's degrees, or whether this is something that we could have a 2 year degree plus, a year of apprenticeship or something instead.
Mhm.
So I think taking a second look at those requirements while we're also making those, first couple years of college to get somebody in more accessible, I think we're on the right track.
Awesome. That's once again kind of working outside the box, right?
Mhm.
I just actually heard that recently. I think it might be in California. They're discussing that as well because I myself have applied for many county jobs that, I have 20 years of experience in management and leadership. And, I look at some of these jobs and go, I could do that.
Yeah.
That's really, I know that I don't have the education for it, but, 100% you put me in that role and I can do that role.
Yes.
And, and I've been denied those jobs because I don't have the education. And so I look at that and I think, wow, I mean, mild hubris on my part, but I'm like, they're missing out.
Yes.
Uh,
No, for real
uh,
though, they are. Yeah, and there's a
yeah,
ton of people like you out there. Hmm.
yeah, and you're kind of forcing yourself, pigeonholing yourself into only having this really small pool. So when I interview people for my store, I interview everybody, right? Like I barely even look at the applications. I give almost every single person an interview.
Yeah.
And that's because I want this real, like, diverse, like, give me as many options as possible. And then I want to pick the best person that best fits with my staff and with the type of job it is and all that business. And I can't do that if, my bar of entry is too high, so
Mhm.
luckily I'm not in a place where we're going to need a college education to work there. But it allows me to find some real gems. I mean, the people that work for me are amazing people. They do a great job. They work well together. I mean, from my store the size it is, we're doing better than the majority of stores our size out there, and that's because we have this diversity within our
Yeah.
store.
Yeah.
Um,
Makes us
so
stronger.
kind of change gears a little bit, but still talking about school. Obviously, here in America, we have some pretty unique issues with gun violence. I know that North Carolina is kind of a proud gun owner, state.
Hmm.
I just talked to Katrina Christensen in North Dakota, and that's kind of the same thing out there.
Oh.
When you got bears around, it
Look, man, some states have pigs, boars,
yeah.
some states have bears,
Yeah, so
some have
I
gators.
understand the necessity, and I myself am pro Second Amendment as well.
Yeah.
But we do have a real problem with gun violence in our schools, and the amount of gun violence that we've had in our schools is insanely high when we look at the rest of the world. I was just watching the thing on Australia, and when they had one mass shooting, and they put in some extreme laws, and they haven't had a single mass shooting since then. And even here for me, my child was in a friend group in a Discord server where a child said, him and another child were going back and forth, and he said, I'm going to come to school and I'm going to take care of this. And I was very upset with my daughter
Oh,
that she didn't come to me and tell me this, because she didn't take it
yeah.
seriously. She
Yeah.
said, oh no, they're just like arguing. Ended up the sheriff did investigate, and he said that there wasn't an issue. Very poor communication as far as the sheriff went and stuff like that. No parents were notified of these types of things. We're just pretty much told everything's okay. um, I think that there is a real problem with gun violence, and as an educator and as a person that has personal background in this, what do you think we can do to make parents feel better about sending their kids to school, and obviously teachers also being a part of that? How do we make everybody feel safe in the school environment?
Oof. Honestly, if I had that answer, I would not be a lowly state legislator, probably. I don't
I don't
know.
know about that. There's a lot of senators that don't have that answer either, apparently.
How to make parents feel safer about their kids in schools. I have yeah, there's a few things. Uh so it's absolutely a huge problem. And it is a problem that we don't have sustained conversations about. It's a problem that we have, flare up conversations about after an
Mhm.
incident occurs, and then it goes away almost immediately. Here in North Carolina, this last year, we repealed the requirement to get a permit in order to purchase a pistol. You used to have to go to your sheriff to have to get a permit in order to go buy a handgun.
Mhm.
And we repealed that. It added some extra levels of security, additional background checks. Sheriffs here, there's a sheriff in every county. There's 100 counties, so they know their community really well. Anyway,
Mhm.
so we got rid of that. So it's very very top of mind for me. We have North Carolina does have an office of violence prevention. That's not something that every state has. I think we just created it maybe a little over a year ago now. So that is something that we need to continue to fund and resource. We do have a task force on safer schools that's already in existence. So there are some things that are happening already that we need to fund and resource. Uh, you know, this is a really great opportunity to look at what other states are doing. I think there's One thing that Republicans do better than Democrats is they borrow policy ideas from other states.
Mm.
In fact, I think our pistol permit purchase repeal was borrowed from another state. I know for a fact that our legislation on history curriculum is comes from Florida. But so there are things that are already happening. Um, the NRA has done a fantastic job at scaring people with the slippery slope argument,
Hmm.
right? So even though the NRA as an organization is not nearly as powerful anymore as they used to be, the tone, the environment that they have established when it comes to communicating about guns is still very, very strong. And
Hmm.
so we have not done a good job about having conversations and about forcing those conversations consistently and continually, and not getting swayed by the, oh, we can't talk about that because Second Amendment, and then everything just shuts down. I think that comes down to the student level as well, right? So we're afraid, I think, to talk to students about what to do when you see a gun,
Hmm.
about what to do about safe gun storage, right? So we're even worried, even on the left we're worried about having conversations about guns, because I think we're worried if we talk about gun safety, then that's implying that we're okay with guns and that we're
Yep.
ceding the argument. So it comes from both sides. But it's a topic that is very much in the shadows, and students feel that as well, like you just said, like your daughter didn't know what to do
Hmm.
when she heard someone make a threat, because we're not explicit about that with students, right? And so I think we need to have more just kind of like low barrier, not casual, but just informal, more often conversations about guns with kids. Say, if somebody asks, do you want to see my dad's gun? What do you say? You role
Hmm.
play conversations. That's very effective with students, helping them practice how they would respond in a situation. Um, Talking to students about, some families go hunting together. And so, not all guns are specifically related to school shootings. Some families, some people like to go out to the shooting range for sport. Like there are ways that we can talk about guns. I think just to make students at least feel comfortable with the topic, so that when they do have questions or when they do want to mention to a teacher, like, hey, I don't know if this is a problem or not, but this is what the student said. I think it opens up students to be more comfortable bringing it up themselves.
Yeah, and this is why I like these conversations, is because even what you're bringing up there is a little different than probably what I've heard multiple times, and that is you're actually bringing up a great point about how on the left, if we start talking about guns, it makes it sound like we're okay with guns. One of the things that, once again, like I was saying about George Washington earlier, and I'll say this about like Joe Biden right now, is that I think that we have to be okay with accepting some of the faults, and at the same time that allows us to have the conversation, right? So people nowadays will go, Joe Biden is old, and I go, okay, so let's talk about Joe Biden being old, because he is. And if you like don't want to talk about that, then you look ridiculous. He
Yes.
is old.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It is.
but let's talk about the CHIPS Act. Let's talk about the Infrastructure Act. Let's talk about
Yes.
the American Recovery Act. Let's talk about
Mhm.
what he got done during his time. And I say this all the time. A guy who's clearly on the right is the guy from Home Depot. He's 90 something years old and he's a CEO. And I don't hear anybody saying that he should be removed. Well, why? Because Home Depot is successful. And I have these conversations even with family. I have family members that get very worked up about this. And, oh, Joe Biden's old, and I'm like, okay, but what is he doing wrong?
Yeah.
So if you
Yeah.
can tell me what he's doing wrong, then we can have that conversation. Same thing goes with guns and stuff. We have to admit, at this time in America, at 1.2 guns per person,
Yep.
there is no going back. Just like climate change, we've passed the tipping point. Now we need to start having tougher conversations about how we keep our children safe, how we
Yes.
keep the future generations safe, how we work towards a better solution given what we have at stake, and that is the future of our children. And so I think for me, one of the good things I've heard from people is talking a lot about mental health. more counselors
Yes.
on campus for kids. You're just talking
Yes.
about how some of the college counselors are handling
Yes.
500, cases. Well, same thing goes for these younger kids. I mean, we look at uh, students to teacher ratio, and it's insane, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah, well, and so I'm so glad you brought this up because yeah, that's the whole second part of
mhm,
the answer that I forgot to mention. So, all the data show that the number one most impactful factor in a student's success in school is the teacher in the classroom, right? We
mhm,
know that the human beings, the adults that are in the building have the biggest impact on students. And
mhm,
so we need to use them. We have a building full of people that have been educated and trained in how to identify red flags. So when I taught high school, I taught special education for a couple years and then taught American history and civics. But teaching special education in particular, I worked with a lot of students that had behavioral issues. We had school threat assessment teams. And it was teachers, counselors, social workers. I mean, people from all different areas of the school to get together and to talk about a kid. What are you
mhm.
seeing when you're interacting with them? What are you seeing when you're interacting with them? Well, what are the resources that are available? What's already happened? What are we worried about? Who have we not talked to yet? What are the reports that you so just to have people sitting around a table, that's a resource. Those adults are a resource that are not being utilized. And so, yes, I think anytime we have the opportunity to fund and resource um, more and good adults that
Mhm.
are, the frontline people, they have the opportunity to identify issues, before they start. And so we need to support them. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and even another thing too that I've actually just seen happening in Michigan that I think is great because when we talk about the adults, obviously teachers are incredibly important. I don't think I have a couple friends that are teachers here in California that I'm like, yeah, you guys need to get paid more, and they're like, hey, my pay is fine. It's the appreciation that could get better,
Yeah,
and I think
yeah,
that
the resources.
that's really missed is really what we need to do is show a lot more appreciation. I thought more people were coming out of COVID with a much better opinion of teachers, and unfortunately it seems as though people have had it worse, and I'm like, did you learn nothing from having to be a teacher for a year? But the other adults in the room are obviously the parents,
Yes. Yep.
and that like you said earlier, that's a much longer conversation. We could be here for 3 or 4 hours talking about what families need in America to be able to spend more quality time with their children and talking to them. But I'm a much more reward rather than punish kind of person. But in the cases of Michigan, where they've instituted this law, where they're finding that if you do not, keep your gun locked up in a safe, if you do not have the correct restrictions on guns, that you will be held accountable if your child brings one to school and takes another child's life. I think that's actually a very good move.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we just saw a 4-year-old take its own life on accident because the father had left multiple guns loaded and within its reach, and he's going to be held accountable for it. And like I said, I'm not a big punishment person. I don't, I think our prison system has a lot of things that need to be fixed about it. But I think when we talk about gun ownership, I think we've kind of like got a blase-faire kind of attitude as gun owners, where like, well, I need it if, someone breaks in my house. How am I going to get it? Well, how often does that happen compared to how often does a kid accidentally discharge a gun and kill their sibling or a friend? Because
Mhm.
when you talk about percentage wise, it actually the opposite is true, is that it's much more likely that a child will accidentally kill another child than your house will ever be invaded and you need a weapon. Um,
Absolutely.
I think that we have to start to have like some common sense and meet in the middle on this kind of stuff. And I think, like you said, the NRA, speaking of like indoctrination and grooming, though they are having their own issues right now, I am so happy to see it.
Right?
They did do an incredible job of indoctrination and grooming of an entire generation of people to instill fear and hatred and worry I remember my father-in-law when Obama was president going, he's going to come take my guns. I'm like,
They're gonna come to my
oh
doorstep,
my god, you know how
knock on
far
my
out in the
door.
woods you live? Like, no one knows you're out here, dude. Obama definitely doesn't know you're out here. And of course, we made it through the multiple administrations since then, and obviously no one's tried to take your guns. When we talk about things like red flag laws, like I'm in support of those types of things. If I am having a mental breakdown, take my guns. Like, please, like, that's not only for the health and safety of others, but for myself as well.
Yeah.
Suicide's a huge problem in our society, and a lot of those are gun deaths. I think that there's just so much to talk about there, but when it comes to like protecting our children, I am willing. I have a friend who has lots of guns, and but he's also been in the school administration system for a long time. And I asked him one time, I go, well, you're kind of a funny person to ask this. You're in the schools and you own a lot of guns. I go, would you give up your guns if it meant that not one more child would die in a school shooting? And he said, hell yeah, dude, hell yeah. He's like,
Hell yeah.
not even a second, like, take them all. And I think that's like, for me at least, that's the important portion, is that the kids need to be safe. The parents need to feel good about their kids going to school and dealing with that. So as far as like administration stuff goes, you said this is your first year? You're just completing your first year?
Yeah, so I won election in 2022, and so 2023 was my first year
Cool. Okay.
in office. So 2024, I'm in my second year, ramping up for reelection for the next 2-year term.
And did I hear you say that, not during this conversation, but on an ad, one of your ads, that they had gerrymandered your district to be a lot more heavily Republican this time?
Yes, yeah, so that's
Yay.
been fun. Um, yes, so I am currently the farthest Western Democrat in the North Carolina legislature. So there's like 2.5 hours more of North Carolina past me that is generally perceived. Now we could talk about this forever. Generally perceived to be deep red.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's kind of the Asheville area, which is sort of like the start of the blue part of North Carolina, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm the farthest Western Democrat, and I'm currently the youngest woman serving in the state legislature in North Carolina. And I have not been shy in Raleigh, and so to yeah. So anyway, I
Mm-hmm.
think there's a lot of factors that have gone into it, but yes. So ultimately, I was gerrymandered. My district was targeted, so it is now in the top 5 most competitive state house districts this year. So that's out of 120 districts. It'll be in the top 5 most competitive.
Wow.
And yeah, so it went from light blue to light red. They even at one point they had split a college campus here in Buncombe County. It had previously been split between congressional districts. Dude, you can look it up like in the news. It's insane. That was the same year that the League of Women Voters put on a gerrymander 5K. So
Mm.
they did like a 5K run, and they drew the line of the run along the border between the 2 congressional districts. And so they had
Mm-hmm.
people like running back and forth, like zigzagging between houses and front yards. And anyway, so there's a great rich history of gerrymandering, particularly in Western North Carolina, but in North Carolina in general. So yeah, so my
Mm-hmm.
district was targeted. It now includes a lot of rural parts of the county, but it also includes one of the very rural parts of the county is also where I used to teach high school. And so even though it is a fairly red part of the county, it's a part of the county that I know well, that knows my name, that I've made connections in the community. So I feel pretty good about that. Plus, Southern Appalachia. We're one of those places that had a pretty significant overlap of like Trump voters and Bernie voters.
Oh,
So it's a very there was
wow.
a couple pockets around the country of just very, like, I guess economic populism was kind of maybe the Venn diagram message
Mm-hmm.
between the uh, So it's always been a very fascinating place politically. But the county that I live, the area around Asheville, has been getting bluer and bluer and bluer, and that has made Republicans very, very mad. And so I think this was
Mm,
their last ditch effort to try to get a Republican seat back in the Asheville area, and they're going to lose.
good. And I'm glad to hear that, because it's probably all these Californians moving to North Carolina. We do populate every other state in the
Mhm.
country. We,
Well, you're
we
welcome. You're welcome.
look at
Love everyone.
Austin, Texas. Oh my God, it's like
Yes,
it's the
yeah.
bluest now. Um, so would you say that's kind of what you've gotten from your time in government? Does it seem like there's a lot of like political games being played constantly? Do you feel like much is getting done? Do you feel good about your time in government so far? Do you feel like there's more that can be accomplished? Where are you at with that?
Whew. Um, yeah, big questions. I feel good about my time in government so far. I feel like it's the right place for me. I think the skills and the background, and the perspective that I have are needed right now in state government. Um, we I don't know if you know. So when I started my first term, my first year in the state legislature, I was in the minority party as a
Mm,
Democrat. A couple months in, and that was by a single seat. So a couple months in, we had a Democrat near the Charlotte area switch parties,
oh,
and she became a Republican. And with that one seat switch, the Republicans got what's known as the super majority.
mhm,
So, which they could now override the governor's veto. So, while the Republicans have been in power since 2011 in North Carolina, 2010, 2011, kind of with the Tea Party movement.
mhm,
So there has, things have been bad since then. But I tell you, that one seat difference, the difference from being in the minority to being in the super minority was huge. Like if I felt like they didn't care what I thought in February, right? By May, when I was in the super minority, I mean, they didn't even pretend to ask Democrats anymore what we thought
mhm,
about stuff because they didn't have to. I spent a lot of time before I went down to the legislature talking to state legislators, representatives and senators who had spent a long time down there and kind of get their opinion on what had changed. And 201, every single one said that there used to be some level of bipartisanship. Like you'd
mhm,
argue on the floor, but then you'd go out and get drinks together afterwards. You'd still ask each other about, how's your kid doing in college? And that has just disappeared.
mm,
Um, and that sucks, because it means that not as much is getting done. We spent a ton of time in Raleigh this year. I had to drive 4 hours every Monday night and then
oh,
4 hours
oh,
back every Thursday night for like 8 months last year, during session. And yet we don't have a whole lot to show for it. It is true that most of the stuff we vote on in the legislature is, unanimous or close to unanimous. It's, approving appointments to positions, or
mm,
it's,
okay,
making the state cookie, the Moravian cookie, sugar cookie, or, just
mhm,
some important stuff too, funding stuff. I mean, there is a lot of unanimous stuff, but that small amount of stuff that is contentious is the really important stuff. It's the culture war stuff.
yeah,
It's the stuff that impacts people's day-to-day lives. It's the stuff that makes it so that you can't get an abortion at 14 weeks anymore. Like,
yeah,
this stuff matters. And so, you know, individual Republicans will tell me privately things like, "Oh yeah, I don't like this bill. I've got concerns about it," or, "I'm not really happy with that piece." But then when it comes down to the vote, they vote for it every single time.
mhm,
Um, and so that's incredibly frustrating. And just the the level of pettiness the level, the egos, honestly, I mean, I say all the time, like teaching high school prepared me way more than I ever could have imagined, and way different ways than I ever could have imagined. Seriously, it's like
uh,
just full grown adults, man. You wouldn't imagine.
oh, I think I can. I worked in fast food as well, so
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
managed a fast food restaurant for
Yeah, okay.
four
Well, that'll
years
do
or
it.
whatever it
Uh-huh.
was. But yeah,
So did my
no.
congressman.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I remember.
um, so yeah, that's kind of something that really is becoming a problem more and more nowadays too. Is like we've gotten away from this idea that we have to work together. We've gotten away from this idea, like you said, the moment that somebody's got all the cards on their side, they take advantage of it, and they really kind of ram home the point that they have the advantage. And then obviously when that flips to the other side, then you just see the other side do it right back to them.
Yeah.
So it's kind of just like, it's kind of a vicious cycle. You don't want to see it. In fact, I even said, a long time ago, and mind you, I'm in full support of the impeachment of Donald Trump during his terms. But I did say during that time, I said, oh, you better watch it. This is Pandora's box.
Yeah.
You're gonna you start impeaching him. And I think my main problem with the impeachment of Donald Trump was that it was theater, because they knew that it wasn't going to pass the Senate. They
Yeah.
knew that there's no way. I mean, maybe they hoped, dreamed that these people would all of a sudden become bipartisan. But I really can't get myself to believe that these people that have been in politics for that long would believe that. I think they knew. And
Yeah.
and now we see that we've got a group of Republicans right now that have literally at every point been told that they have absolutely no evidence by their own witnesses. The only witness that they had turns out to have been receiving information from a particular Russian operative. And you start to end up with this idea that, okay, hey guys, like it looks like this isn't going to turn out, and I'm all for whether it's a Biden or it's a Trump. If they've done something wrong, they need to be held accountable.
Mhm.
But at this point, it looks like a farce. But unfortunately, they said, "Well, yours look like one too." And
Exactly.
you end up with this back and forth
Yeah.
that just isn't good for Americans. It's not good for the everyday American to see it or to feel the results of it. And that's really unfortunate, because especially for people like yourself who are just getting into government, you're losing the motivation that makes you want to be there. Like, we want to get stuff done. I want to see
You see
people
that on
in
my face?
Congress. Yes. When we talk about other politicians in the races right now,
Mhm.
obviously North Carolina has made some recently strange decisions on the Republican side, which, I'll be honest with you, the right as a whole is an absolute shit show right now. um I really wish that we could get back to the days of just being angry at George Bush. um
Yeah, right?
it seemed like such a good time now that we look back at it.
I
um
know.
and
Yearn for
and,
those days.
and I like to say this because I think it's important. When I talk about conservatives and Republicans, I'm generally not talking about Trump supporters. I think that Trump supporters are an entirely different type of conservative. I think when they say rhino, I think they're making a mistake. I think that those other conservatives are conservatives and that they're
Mhm.
the actual rhinos, because they are Republicans in name only. When you talk about Trump supporters, there is a wide variety of opinions that don't coincide with traditional conservative policy. And what we're seeing right now is a real, they call it grassroots. I don't know if it's even grassroots really, but some of the people like MTG have no experience. Um, I think it's Michelle Morrow is the one who is running for the
Tomorrow.
Republicans, Morrow,
Mhm.
on the educational board. And then Mark Robinson is actually the lieutenant governor of North Carolina already, correct? And
He
now
is.
he's is he running to replace Cooper? Is Cooper the governor of
He
North Carolina
is.
right now? Yeah.
Yep.
And it blows my mind, because years ago, my wife, I would come home and my wife would say, Donald Trump said this. And I go, okay, hold on. In context. Let's look up the article. Let's look what he really said. And over the years, it kind of got to a point where, nope, that's exactly what he said. It's not out of context. You can listen to the whole conversation. That's what he meant. And it's trickled down to these other people like Morrow and Robinson, to where they said these kind of crazy things that years ago I would have told you it was taken out of context. It was clipped. It was edited. And now you're starting to look at it. Now, in Robinson's case, I will say this. He did say, I want to go back to a time when women didn't vote, but he did qualify that statement by saying, well, there was hardworking people back then, and there were patriots. And he also kind of did this thing that Republicans have been doing lately, where he kind of wanted to take credit for the civil rights movement and stuff for Republicans, which is
Oh
absolutely
yeah, that's North
ridiculous.
Carolina's favorite hobby.
That's what they like to
Yeah,
do, right?
just
Well,
completely ignore the party platform switch in the,
yeah,
in the 50s and 60s.
literally
Yeah.
at the time of
Oh,
the
yeah.
civil rights movement. I'm like, dude, you picked the exact time that these two parties switched. And one of the things I like to say to some of my Trump supporter viewers is, how many Democrats do you know that fly a Confederate flag? Oh, I know a lot of bullshit. You do. Okay, my mom's from Texas. Believe me, I've had the argument on the Confederate flag within my family multiple times. When it comes to some of the stuff that he said, you can say, "Oh, well, I qualified it. I meant it as this or that," but really, the gist of some of the other things he said, whether it's LGBT rights, where he literally said they're filth, and then qualified it with, "That's right, I said they're filth." Like
Yep.
that leaves no context unexplored. That means exactly what it means. He also said that the Christian nationalism is the way to go for America, and that Christians will own this country.
Mhm.
And I know a lot of these guys feel real comfortable saying this when they're surrounded by their constituents, and the MAGA supporters are very loud. What do you think about North Carolina and where it's going with these types of politicians? Do you think a guy like Mark Robinson is going to win, or a Michelle Morrow is going to win? And if they do, what do we do about that? How do we get out there and start to fight against that kind of rhetoric?
Yeah. Whew. So a couple things. Part of me agrees with what you said earlier that Trumpers are not Republicans,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's a different thing. I think after a while, the more they nominate him as their presidential nominee, at
Mm-hmm.
some point, I think we have to accept that they have taken over the party, right? I
Yeah.
don't believe that the majority of Republican voters in North Carolina support Mark Robinson or Michelle Morrow. I don't believe that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we have that issue at in state government in general, particularly in North Carolina, I'm assuming in other states as well, that the actual elected officials are more extreme than the voters that put them there, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when we talk about representation, that is one of the many aspects of representation that people aren't getting. So I do think that Mark Robinson and Michelle Morrow are not representative of North Carolina Republican voters in that way, but they won the nominations.
Mm-hmm.
And and that's a huge concern of mine, and for the reasons you named, that Mark Robinson in particular, and we, there's still a lot we don't know about Michelle Morrow. She seems to have
Mm-hmm.
come out of nowhere. The things that we've seen, we certainly don't like. But Mark Robinson in particular, he's been very out and open about this stuff since the beginning. Um, and, both of them, when you look at both of them as candidates, neither one of them has a platform. Neither one of them has experience I mean, even him, he's our current lieutenant governor, and he hasn't done
Mm-hmm.
anything. Now, granted, it is a weak office, and that is on purpose. Republicans in the legislature have consistently over the years been stripping power from the executive branch and bringing it to the legislative branch. Again, a whole nother podcast. But so it is already a very weak office, lieutenant governor. But even then, I mean, he hasn't done anything with that office, and he didn't do anything before he was lieutenant governor. He made a couple speeches,
Mm-hmm.
and that's that's what got him his platform, and that's what got him elected. And the same thing is happening now. He has nothing he's actually done to run on, and so he has to rely on rhetoric and messaging because it's all he has. And it's the same thing with Michelle Morrow. You're absolutely right. I mean, we can talk about, decades of examples of Republicans putting someone in charge of a department that they don't think should exist or that they are actively working against, right? And we've seen that in education in particular. And so, yeah, to have a woman whose only experience with education is homeschooling her kids now in charge. I mean, homeschooling is literally non-public, and she's now running for the office superintendent of public instruction. Like I come on. And it's not just that she doesn't have the experience, but that she is actively harmful in a lot of ways. She has made many Islamophobic comments very openly. She has made a lot of comments about Christian nationalism and how she feels we need more, Christianity. They say religion, but they mean evangelical Protestant
Yes.
Christianity in public schools. And so, yeah, Mark Robinson is a pastor, right? So there's absolutely, Christianity is very deeply tied in with all of this. It's part of the argument. North Carolina just passed its largest ever expansion of private school vouchers, to public taxpayer money going to students to pay for tuition at private schools. We have the most unaccountable program in the country. This is taxpayer money going to discriminatory religious private institutions that don't have to serve every student. And so while while I'm extremely concerned about Mark Robinson and Michelle Morrow, I'm not surprised that this is where we are right now. It feels like the last couple of years have really been leading up to people like this. Now, whether I think they're going to win, I don't think so. I think that we can outwork. You can't gerrymander statewide offices. So so I feel okay. North Carolina has been getting a lot of national attention that we rightly deserve and need. And so I think there's going to be infrastructure here that's going to help us outwork Republicans. There's been a massive resurgence lately in college Dems and young Dems chapters across the state. We have the youngest state party chair in the country. She is dynamite. And so the mood and the hope and the atmosphere across the state among Democrats, really as bad as the candidates that the Republicans are putting up, we feel, not only do we feel good about our chances, but we also feel really good about our own candidates. We have a fantastic candidate who's going to run against Michelle Morrow in Mo Green, and a fantastic candidate who's going to run against Mark Robinson for governor, Josh Stein. And so, we're able to talk about how great they are and also talk equally about how terrible the other candidates are. There's a website, I think it's called realmarkrobinson.com. And it's literally just like his quotes. It's him in his own words. He has called a couple other things you forgot to mention. He has called public school teachers wicked people. He has said that women are not called to lead.
Yep.
He
Feminism
has said
is
that
Satanism.
Yep. Yep. He has said that if he were governor and he had a willing legislature, that he would completely ban abortion, no exceptions, in North Carolina.
Yeah, that's worked out really well so far. Oh my God. And I the thing I love about talking to people on the left is that the left's always been the party of hope, well, like I said, if you want to go far enough back, if you want to pull a Mark Robinson and go back to the Democrats of the Civil War, which you want to talk about the Whigs or the Federals?
I know, right?
This is why I think the whole having parties is kind of crazy in the first place. Is it's values, not political party stamps of approval. It really comes down to, people ask me, they go, "Are you progressive?" I go, "No, I'm not a progressive." And they go, "Well, yeah, you are, because of the things you." I go, "No, no, no. I have progressive values." I go, "If you want to be honest, if you want to stick me in anything, you'd probably put me in democratic socialist, because I'm all
Mhm.
for working within the system to get social safety nets and stuff like that." But I'm like, but I'm
Yeah.
also, like I said, I'm pro Second Amendment, as long as it has the proper, like, common sense gun laws.
Mhm.
And I really think when we talk about parties and you start discussing, what the Democrats were doing during the Civil War, you're talking about a completely different type of people. And to that point, when you say that about Trump, and them reelecting him and stuff, I do think that we're at that place. We are at a place where the Whigs are going away, and you got the next iteration, because they're pot committed. They literally sold their soul to the devil.
Mhm.
For a bunch of people that talk about Jesus Christ as much as they do,
Right?
they did the most un-Jesus like thing you could possibly do. I don't know if you've known this. I don't know how much you're on the internet, but nowadays, people in the Trump atmosphere are actually arguing that Jesus wasn't a nice person. That's I For so many years have I had discussions with people on the right where I've said, this or that about religious, and they're like, "Hey, we donate. Hey, we provide a place for homeless people. Hey, we allow people in that have bad lives, and all these people that go to prison that find Christ." And I almost had nothing that I could say about that, except for, yeah, you know what? Actually, you're right. And now I say things like, well, hey, let's get back to that. Let's talk about being Christ-like, and let's talk about, turning the other cheek and accepting people for their faults. And, Jesus, was crucified for your sins, and not just yours,
Mhm.
but also the gay people's as well.
Yeah.
Like, even if, like in my case, I don't believe it's a sin, for them, they should be accepting that. I literally had this conversation. I've had multiple conversations now where people have said, no, Jesus Christ didn't like the adulterer. Jesus Christ, actually judged the aborter. All these things that are like insane. This guy, I was like, "Are you arguing with me that Jesus was a bad dude?" And he's like, "Yeah, yeah. He if he was alive today, he'd hate all these people." And I'm like, "Wow, how did we get here?" It's really seriously some 1984 style stuff
Yeah.
of, no, it's always been like this. And it's like, no,
Yeah.
no, it hasn't.
Yep.
We switch gears. You guys switch gears.
Dude, the founding fathers didn't go to church every Sunday. Like
No. Yeah,
the
other shit to
people that
do.
went to church every week were like the weirdos.
Yeah. Yeah.
God was a different thing
Yeah,
back
during that time. And so I think you're right. I think, and you're not the first person that's actually corrected me on that. I think John Pedora also corrected me on that. And that is, I think, once again, I'm leaning left, and I have a little more hope that, maybe we'll see people on the right get back to a portion of time where they're like, hey, you know what, I'm pro-life and you're pro-choice, and, I'm anti-big government, so I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. And I seriously hope that we can get back there. But I also have the fear that you guys are correct in that we just saw the RNC get taken over by Laura Trump and I forgot the,
and our guy,
yeah,
Watley,
Watley. Thank you.
who
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, North
who
Carolina. That's right.
rigged his own election for
No.
North Carolina GOP party chair. And that's the guy they chose. It's like
Of
you can
course they
Google
did.
it. It's very well known.
And it's,
Seriously,
once again, it's projection, right? It's like every time they accuse somebody of something else, it's always
100%.
them. Every time you
Always.
hear about a senator, what was it, the guy from Ohio or whatever, a long time ago, he's like totally
Pastor.
anti-gay, totally anti, and then he's found in the bathroom making secret hand signals on their stall. Guess what, bud? Join the left. You don't have to make secret hand signals. You can just be gay and no one cares. Like,
You
it's
could have made it so much
insanity.
easier for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when you look at that and you realize, oh, like now they've got pieces in the RNC. Obviously, people within the RNC approved of these things happening. You've even gotten people within the RNC that are saying that they're willing to pay his bills. Florida almost tried to pay his bills, and then DeSantis, the jilted bride DeSantis, was like, I don't think so. Best thing DeSantis has ever done in his life was vetoing that bill to pay Trump's lawyer bills. Um,
Finally.
but unfortunately,
Standing
yeah,
up for himself.
I think we're going to see on the right more and more of that type of stuff, because They have become the party of symbolism over substance. And that is, they're going to stand up there, and people like Mark Robinson are perfect as he is a preacher. He's got that cadence down. People like to hear the way the preacher speaks.
Talks pretty.
It sounds real good. And when you're up there and you're talking forcefully and you're saying things that people want to hear, then everything sounds good. But I think a lot of these people forget that the Republican Party as a whole is the party of not doing anything. Like you said, when they don't like a branch of the government, they stick somebody in it, Betsy DeVos, that doesn't know how to do the job and chooses not to do the job, because that's actually the Republican way, is to not do anything. Ask Donald
Democrats
Trump.
have bad ideas and Republicans have no ideas.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
That is exactly the truth of it, isn't it? As much as I love Bernie, I love me some Bernie, but a lot of the stuff he said, I was like, dude, have we thought this through yet? Did we run this through the computer, the simulation?
No, right? Yeah,
uh,
that sounds nice.
and it used to actually kind of work together, but now we're kind of getting into a place that's a little bit scary. But it is what it is, and I think that I tell Trump supporters all the time. They go, "What are you going to do if he wins?" I go, "I'm still going to be here talking trash. What do you think I'm going to do?" I'm like, if he wins, first of all, I'm not going to do what you guys did and cry for 4 years about this and act like the other guy rigged it. Although at this point, he might. But
Should we?
I'll be here. I'm gonna keep using my voice. My little channel has reached something like 1.2 million people. I have 4,500 subscribers, and up until about a week and a half ago, I only had 25 or 2,900.
Wow.
So I'm gonna keep using my voice, and that's what I'm here
Oh
for,
yeah.
is to try to make a difference. And if Donald Trump wins in 2024, I don't believe he will. I think that I have hope for America. I have hope for Americans. I believe there's a lot of people on the right, Nikki Haley supporters, Ron DeSantis supporters, that look at Trump and go, you know what, that guy's kind of a dick, and I'm not going to vote for him. And I think that the Joe Biden supporters, once they get over like that, what they're upset about this or upset about that with Joe, that they'll come out and they'll vote. And then, like you said, the young Democrats. After talking to Adam Mockler, I really feel like he I think he's in his early 20s, maybe 20, really represents the young Democrats. And I love talking to that kid. I felt like so much hope for the next generation after talking to him. Speaking of the
Yeah,
next
you should.
generation,
Yeah. Oh
let's
yeah.
talk about the two big questions that I ask everybody.
Sure.
Um, I believe there's multiple things that money shouldn't be involved in our government. I believe that healthcare money needs to get out of healthcare. Money needs to get out of the prison system. I just recently added education. Somebody brought that up to me recently. Money out of education. That it needs to be more of a like you said, localized. Like, what do we need as a community, as a state? What do the teachers think? What are the principal, the superintendent? Like, really, that kind of thing, and less people paying for a certain narrative to be pushed. And that goes for everybody, left or right. But politics, obviously, is the if we're if we're brainstorming, the big bubble in the middle is politics. How do we get money out of politics?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mentioned my state party chair earlier, Anderson Clayton. She's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
She has a saying that I really like. She says, "In order to make politics better, we have to get better people into politics."
Mm-hmm.
And I believe very strongly, and we touched on this a little bit earlier in the conversation. One of the ways to get money out of politics, it's a long-term strategy, of course, but is to make it easier for working class people to serve in politics. So in North Carolina, state legislators make a little under $14,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like I said, last year, I had to drive to Raleigh 4 hours away once a week for about 8 or 9 months out of the year. Um, and and the state legislator pay has not been raised in 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And our state, our House Speaker and our President Pro Tem have both made it very clear that they will not, as long as they are in their positions, they will not raise that pay. Now, the argument has been, right, that it's political suicide, that you can't, propose to raise your own salary, that voters won't accept that. But A, There's been research done here in North Carolina, and they have found that overwhelmingly voters in North Carolina have no idea how much legislators are
Yep.
paid. They usually think it's around 70 or eighty thousand
Mm-hmm.
dollars. And secondly, when they find out what the pay is, they overwhelmingly support raising it. Right. So that argument of voters won't support it, that might have worked 20 years ago when it had been the pay for 10 years. But when you haven't raised it in 30 years, so that means that the only people that really can currently serve in state government in North Carolina are people that are independently wealthy,
Mm-hmm.
that are retired, or that have, a spouse who's a lawyer or a realtor, or somebody, or they have a job that allows them to take months off, with an unpredictable schedule. And so that necessarily changes the types of policies that are going to pass across the state in all different fields, but obviously in campaign finance as well. So when you continue to incentivize people who are wealthy or who have access to wealth being in office, then there's no motivation to change that structure. Right. So we've got to change. We've got to do things. The umbrella term is professionalizing the legislature. So whether that means raising the pay, whether that means creating more standard hours
Mm-hmm.
on what the session is, so that you can have a part-time job. Right. I'm extremely lucky that I'm able to maintain a part-time job because I can do it mostly remotely,
Mm.
and because I've worked very closely with my supervisor. But most people aren't able to make that work. And so that's one thing that we can do long term is create structures where working class people are able to serve in office, and then they're going to bring with them that background of experiences. Um, you know, uh, Maybe we need to take another look at public financing for campaigns, in particular for certain campaigns. So in North Carolina, we elect our judges, and it's weird, and judges aren't really allowed to campaign on issues that might come before them in the court, so they
Mm-hmm.
just have to like talk about their values, and like it's a weird thing, right? So like at the very least, maybe let's do public, financing for campaigns for judicial races, for example, or for school board races, right? Something that really shouldn't be partisan, that you shouldn't have to raise a bunch of money and make a bunch of promises for stuff
Mm-hmm.
that's local and that impacts people in a way that shouldn't be partisan. So I think there's ways that we can chip away at that. Um, we need a better Supreme Court in order to overturn Citizens United. I mean, that's right. You can't
Yeah.
have this conversation without talking about that. Corporations are not people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how else to say it, and I think we all know it. And like it was, can we just admit that that was a terrible decision and go back and fix it?
Yeah, I mean, if we're gonna overturn Roe v. Wade, I think that's the lowest bar that we should be able to
Right?
clear is overturning that decision. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
oh
Do we
my
all just get to
god,
like pick one that we want to like take
yeah,
back? Is that what
yeah,
we're
isn't
doing?
that the way it works? And,
Yeah.
and it's so insane to think that something like Roe v. Wade can be so what isn't a person anymore?
Hmm. Yeah. Exactly.
Corporations,
Yeah.
embryos.
Yeah. Firm.
Where are we going to draw the line? And when you talk about the Powell memo and Citizens United, and you talk about the Chamber of Commerce and lobbying, all this stuff, those are all really big issues with money and government. And I think that a lot of people just aren't really well educated to things. I
Mhm.
recently became educated to what the Chamber of Commerce's role in lobbying is, and that's one of the best facades that you could possibly have. Is that, oh, it's just this Chamber of Commerce has a great name, it feels good. It's like, and then you realize that no, this is literally from the Powell memo days of creating a bigger voice for businesses. Because as crazy as it was back then, before Powell became a justice, they thought, oh, business doesn't have enough effect on American government. And I'm like, it shouldn't have that much effect in the first place. What are we doing?
Yeah. What are we basing the? Let's talk about the premise.
Yeah, and of
Yeah.
course it's, I'm a business owner and I want to have more. Those
Uh-huh.
guys obviously felt during that time they were the backbone of society, and that
Mhm.
they should have more, input on these things than the average American. And if anything, even if you want to agree with that, even if you say during that time, sure, you know what, it built our country, we've moved on. and it's time to rethink some of these things and change them. And that's what I'm saying. You want to change Roe? Okay, then we get to change other things as well. I do
Bet.
want to say this though. That's an awesome answer on your part, because most of the time it's a very hard question for people to answer, right? And almost everybody just says the same thing: Citizens United. Let's get Citizens United. It's the main talking point. I've had somebody bring up the Powell memo, or not the Powell memo, but things to do with the Powell memo. Um,
Mhm.
but your point, and I want to say it was Jamie Raskin, and not that Jamie Raskin's ever going to talk to me, but I'm sorry if I'm misquoting the person. Somebody in the Senate, and I believe it was Jamie Raskin, brought up a similar point. And at the beginning, I had the exact same response to it that you said that people had been polled to have said, and that was Jamie Raskin said, or I'm going to stop saying his name in case he wasn't the one. The senator said, I think if you were to raise the rate of pay for the politicians that are doing the job, you would see less willingness to take money from outside sources to change their points of view. And at first I went, well, hold on, man. Like you get enough money. Like and I did the same thing. I went and looked, and they get paid okay. And obviously in the Senate they're being paid pretty well. But on your level, people aren't being paid anything. I mean, to be honest, that is, in California, you might be able to take home 2,000 of that. But but you really do start to see, oh, okay, once I get behind the scenes and look at these things, you do realize that, like you're making a great point. The border, or the bar for entry is incredibly high. I've thought about it myself. Like, people have said to me, they're like, why don't you get involved? Why don't you run for office? Because I got two kids and I got a 40-hour a week job and I've got a podcast and a YouTube channel, and they go, well, if you get in office, you can just drop all of that. I go, what? No. Have you looked at how much those people make? And
Yeah,
even
you
on
could
the
also
other
just
side.
drop feeding your kids, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, they'll be fine. But even in the area of, if you want to get in, you're going to join up, you're going to volunteer, you're going to do these things. There's not a lot of room for parents, or people who would be the most politically motivated. I point this out to my
Yes.
single friends all the time. They go, well, why do you care so much about this? I go, you don't have kids. I go,
Yes.
I do. That's why I care. So those are the people that are going to care the most, but they have the highest bar of entry because they've
Exactly.
got so many other responsibilities. And really, at the end of the day, it's just like the teacher thing, it's just like the doctor thing. If we want to encourage people to be in these positions that care about things, then we got to show them that it's worth their while, and we've got to make it better and more available. I really like that point of view. And like I said, I even admit my initial reaction to hearing a senator say that he should have his pay increased. I was like, what? Time out. um,
I don't
and
think that.
and when you have, I've said this about Obama. People go, well, you don't think Obama took money? I go, look, I think every one of these politicians have taken money. When you're at that level, I go, you can even look at it from the point of view of, if a big oil company comes to, let's say, Bernie Sanders, hypothetically, a guy who literally epitomizes, the socialist movement, a man of the people. He's in there yelling at the Starbucks CEO. He's doing great things. But let's say the Koch brothers come to him and go, look, we can give you this money and you can do this, or I can go to your guy right over there and I can give him this money and he'll get it done. You're talking about families. You're talking about people that are going, okay, well, I want my kids set for life. I want to, like, I understand the human portion of
Right.
why people are put in these places and why they accept these payments and
So
stuff.
change the environment that
So
puts them
change
in that.
it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's why I
Yeah.
like that answer, is it gets outside of the box. The other thing that, and we've talked about this quite a bit going into this, is obviously we live in like polarized, incredibly crazy political times that we haven't seen probably since like Tilden and Hayes. I mean, like the 1880s, like,
Yeah.
um, this has obviously been a very surreal experience in politics, I think, for everybody. And I think that oftentimes, even with my viewership, I try to, write a certain line of partisan or bipartisanship, where I want to see people welcome into the fold people from the other side when they're open, right? like you said, when you're in Congress and you've got the one seat difference, everybody wants to talk. When you have supermajority, now nobody wants to talk. I think on our part, and I hate to be the go high guy, but I would love to see more reaching across the aisle. Is there anybody that you've worked with in your time in government, or is there anybody that you would look forward to working with if you work your way up higher and higher in the Republican Party, or just maybe just not in the Democratic Party that you think that you'd like to work with?
Yeah. There have been there've been some little bipartisan wins this last year. It has been, very very little. It has, as I said before, it has been a struggle, and it's I think it's incumbent upon the party that's in power to be the one to reach across the aisle for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I, absolutely did what I could. So I actually filed a bill this last session. It did not end up getting heard by committee, but I filed a bill that was co-sponsored by a Republican. It was a bill that had to do with speeding in school zones and the fines going back to the school technology fund. And I knew that she was a Republican who she and her husband had owned a business that fixed school buses around the state. And so I knew that she cared about, schools. And so we found this one little very specific thing that we had in common. And I was able to get a Republican co-sponsor on that. So, that felt good, even though the bill didn't end up getting voted on. There was another bill, it's fun to get surprised in some ways, right? So there was another bill that did not pass, but will be refiled. That was co-sponsored by a couple Democrats and Republicans in the House this last year, and it was about using, allowing more use of psilocybin and MDMA to treat PTSD. And the two Republican co-sponsors for that bill were a pharmacist and a military veteran. And so, right. So you get the wins where you can. And it was not something that I would have expected, drug use to treat mental health. It's not something if you'd asked me a year ago, is this something that you think you'll find some Republicans to work with you on? But it was something that they were interested in. And it was because of that background that they had and that personal experience that they had. And so, before I went down to the legislature, constantly people were telling me that, relationships are key, that you've really got to work on building relationships with people. And my initial reaction when people first started telling me that was, I don't have time for that shit. What? No, I'm there to do stuff. I'm there to pass bills. I'm there to ask questions in committee and make floor speeches and do things, help constituents with the DMV and their unemployment insurance, do the things that I'm supposed to do. I only have 2 years. And then of course, as soon as I got down there, I was like, oh shit, this would be so much easier if I knew that person or if we had a relationship. So I very quickly learned that, okay, they were right. And so that it's something that I have been enjoying and sort of recommitting myself to. And yeah, you got to remind yourself of those reasons why you're doing it. And so I think about that MDMA bill, and I think about, there are things that you don't know about some of these people, and the more you learn, the more opportunity you have to possibly do some good things for North Carolina.
Good job. That's great answer. And I also think maybe all these Republicans watching Joe Rogan all of a sudden.
I know. Yeah, that might be it too. No, that's fair.
all of a sudden, they don't mind drugs. We
won't wade into that too much. I'm not gonna lift that.
You're not gonna go there. I just need to hang out and talk to these people. We can have open, honest conversations. Yeah. I think that I feel what you're saying. Obviously, all jokes aside, when you start to talk about life experience influencing what one of the things I was going to say earlier about gun violence is that, crazy enough, you never hear a parent that has lost a child to gun violence that's, going, no, you shouldn't have these common sense gun laws. It doesn't
Hmm.
matter if you're telling me no right-wing people have lost their children in this. It's only been all liberal people. No, everybody, that's lost a child when it happens, it knows the value of putting through new, better legislation to protect other people's children. And unfortunately, that's kind of where we're at in our society. Is if it doesn't happen to you, then then you're not interested in fixing it. And I think we gotta get out of that mentality. And most of us that are parents, I think, have really felt that like need to be in other people's shoes. If you're a good parent, you look
Yeah.
at like what your children experience or what your children's friends experience, or and you
Hmm.
go, man, I don't want to see that. I want to see people do well. And I
Empathy. It's
personally want that.
magic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you?
Yeah. So you can read more about me at prather4nc.com. That's FOR. And that's Prather. And that has list of, the issues that I care about. We've got news articles on there of work that I've been doing the last year, some other interviews that I've done, and as well as a list of my endorsements. So I'm really proud to have a lot of endorsements from women's rights organizations, LGBTQ organizations, environmental organizations, all of the good guys, really.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, read more about me. Being accessible is really important to me. So if anybody has questions, please let me know. If any young people are considering running for office or have questions about what it's like to run for office, then that's my absolute favorite conversation to have. I love talking to people about that. So yes, I am an open book and a lifelong educator. So
Awesome.
please reach out.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really enjoyed that conversation. And if you want to see more conversations like that, check out these podcasts. Until next time, remember, get educated and get out and vote.